All right. So we're all here now and ready for the news. And looks like we start off with Elizabeth. So go ahead.
Yeah, so the first one that I've got here today is DMV got busted, and not just our DMV, but all around the country, got busted selling data to all kinds of different companies. Some of them are private investigators and tow companies, insurance, like you might expect, but then that's not it. They've been selling our data to all different kinds of businesses, and some of them are a little bit shady. So I know that one, they don't really vet who they sell this data to on any level, which is a little disturbing. And it costs like a tenth of a penny each, basically, to sell all of our info to these companies. So they're just doing it unfettered, no restrictions. I had read that in another article about the same thing, that Bernie Sanders was kind of on a mission to get some oversight on this. But it's pretty interesting. You put your stuff out, your info out there, and you don't really have any control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, well, the general idea is something I think that anybody that goes to Hope has known. They had a private investigator at Hope every year, whenever Hope meets, that would just explain all this data private investigators can get. But the surprising thing to me is I didn't know they were getting it from the DMV. It would seem to be illegal for the government to collect this data and then just sell it to private companies.
You'd think that they would actually vet them to make sure they're a real public investigator, but they don't.
Well, I work in the public sector myself, as do you, and I'm not surprised at all that they don't do any of the due diligence. I mean,
right.
As far as I can tell, government work is done by a desperate, overworked, undertrained person just doing whatever is possible and lost.
But it's trying to survive the day.
It's big money. The figure last year on so just for example, the state of Wisconsin last year made over $17 million. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I heard years ago on NPR where they had the Texas county was having a gun buyback program, and on the same weekend they were selling their used guns, and he said, I know where you're going with these questions, but you got to understand, we have a law requiring us not to waste money. So when we have used equipment, we're required to sell it to get the money back. Yeah, well.
The never-ending cycle.
Yeah. Looks like you got one, Irvin.
Yeah, 600,000 GPS trackers made by a Chinese company, unsurprisingly, has a password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Wow.
And these are like things you'd wear, or what are they?
I think they're like for cars.
Okay.
But either way, you can spoof the location. You can do anything and everything, and you can get into the network with it. The IMEI trackers were the same, or they were sequential. It's just another one of those IoT devices that the makers did not think things through. They just built it and got it out. And now they're exposed that, hey, anybody with this device from this manufacturer, we know your password, we can get in, we see everything.
Yeah, but I wonder if you can make a botnet out of it.
Probably.
And also something interesting I noticed last time we were in China, when I went to do the car hacking village at DEF CON, it was interesting because they had found extraneous, in addition to the built-in GPS trackers, they'd found extraneous GPS trackers in the rental cars. So that could be a pretty big botnet.
Well, I keep getting these ads for Metro Mile for cheap car insurance, and in order to get it, I have to put a hardware tracker in my car. I haven't gone for that yet.
Really?
Because they're going to monitor to make sure you don't speed or anything, and that's why it's cheap.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, I considered it because I don't like speeding, but anyway, I didn't do it yet.
It makes you wonder, though, too, over time, think about the way that private corporations have influence over regulatory compliance. I think it's interesting that certain medical devices, to ensure compliance, have a cellular connection and they track your usage data. And then upload this data to your medical provider to see whether you're meeting compliance. And I think that's creepy, especially because the data it uploads isn't always accurate or correct. But they managed to push that through. And it's dystopian, but I could definitely foresee a time when everybody has to have something like this in their vehicle in order to be allowed on the road.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not even sure I would completely complain. I just saw a video today of another person asleep in their Tesla.
Ha!
And people driving by see them. So, I'm not sure I would mind getting more idiots off the road. But anyway, it's so this one I thought was pretty exciting because I got involved in this myself. I found some medical data just on an open server years ago, and I reported it to them, and then they issued a legal statement that I was the breach by finding it, and I'm an evil hacker and I broke the law. And I talked to my lawyer, and he said, well, technically you could say you did, because of the way the CFAA is written. If you send an HTTP request to a web page and it hands you the data and you're not supposed to see the data, you've broken the law. And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And finally, the Ninth Circuit has ruled what I thought was true from common sense, which is if you put it on a web server and there is no password barrier, that constitutes authorization to see that data. I thought you haven't broken the law until you go past a barrier that would be like a no trespassing sign saying, this is the part you're not allowed to see. And that has not been the way this law has been interpreted, but this new finding from the Ninth Circuit is beginning to interpret it that way. So I would be a lot happier if this succeeds and becomes the standard. It seems to me like for example, if you do what Google did, you drive around with a car and just pick up unencrypted wireless signals, anything somebody sprays unencrypted into the open space ought to be considered you're authorized to see it, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like talking in a big room. If someone's shopping, how is that illegal?
Or out in public. Well, the rule has been, do you have an expectation of privacy? And in a similar sense, they have said that whatever the website designer expected you to do is all you're authorized to do. So if you right-click and view source, they didn't expect you to do that, so that's illegal.
That's some real magical thinking, though. It's like the garbage. Once you put your garbage out to the curb, you can't expect that it's going to be private.
Right, because it's in public space.
WGET is not a crime.
What's that?
WGET is not a crime.
Well, apparently not. That was, in fact, the issue here. They ran a scraper to scrape all the pages, and then they said, you're not allowed to do that. And they said, wait a minute, you didn't put a password on it, so how is that not legal? Anyway, all right. Well, we're back to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, which one we got here? Is it the Siri one?
Siri, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought this was very interesting. So the march towards becoming ever more politically correct continues. I thought this was pretty interesting that Apple is deliberately programming Siri to avoid any kind of politically contentious topics, which makes sense, I guess, from a corporate standpoint. But I just thought it was interesting. They actually set up a rule set so that they could make her responses as politically neutral as possible. And I guess it's sort of an improvement because before you'd ask Siri, "Are you a feminist?" and Siri would say, "Sorry, I don't know what that is," or "I don't really know." So I guess it's a little bit better now. Now she says, "It seems to me that all humans should be treated equally." But I just think it's interesting how these things evolve.
I think it very much is, and it's closely related to the one I'm going to talk about later. This is there's been a march to bland everything out so you don't offend anybody. And now there's an opposing branch to just say what you mean, even if it offends somebody. And we're still fighting that out, especially online.
I think it's interesting that, for example, one of the examples in this article, Siri and China will tell you nothing about Tiananmen Square.
Of course. Well, that's to obey Chinese law. They have to do that, or they wouldn't be able to sell the product in China.
Right.
But I think, that's something I talk a lot in my classes about. I mean, China censors the internet heavily, and the United States was the only place that didn't, and now we're going to censor it too. So as far as I can tell, free speech was an old-fashioned idea that has been abandoned by every major nation. Now everybody wants to block an increasing amount of free speech on the internet. And to be fair, you never really had it here because you couldn't post copyrighted content. But we're not even going to have freedom to say political things on the internet anymore.
Well, and it makes me wonder if it's going to be sort of like it is in China, where, okay, you can't say it here and you can't access that information here, but certain countries aren't going to, I think certain countries aren't going to impose these kind of restrictions. So, are we going to, is everybody going to have servers set up in like Iceland or something where they can legally publish these things? There's always a workaround, it seems like.
Well, I already read the BBC to get a clear, much better information about American political happenings than I get locally.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. I think it's a slippery slope.
It is.
And it's not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah. Has there been any response from like the Google Assistant about this?
Good question.
That is a good question.
I imagine that Google Assistant censored stuff in China first, but
yeah.
I don't know actually. I wonder how that works on Chinese Androids, whether because they up until recently, Google hasn't been allowed in China at all. So I wonder if they have like Baidu Assistant or what.
I know they put a Microsoft AI on Twitter about a year ago, and the Twitter people taught it to say racist things within a day, and they had to take it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that was funny.
It isn't a surprise. I mean, I think it's interesting that I came across this when I was doing some research for a class that I'm taking, a psychology class actually. And I think it's interesting that a few years ago, Google filed a patent on developing robots with personalities. So I think that's again going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
I think it is. I mean, if it was me, I would have a dial where you can set it to choose your preference. Do you want it to be like Donald Trump, or do you want it to be bland and inoffensive and kid-friendly, or do you want it to be like on the left? And everybody would get really mad at the existence of that dial. But I think that's what people really want. Choose here. Do you want Fox News or Huffington Post or NBC? And we'll take that personality for you.
Right.
Anyway, that's the funny thing. We have such a division, and people get offended if you say there's a division. Anyway, so
stating the obvious, people get upset.
What that story reminded me of is years ago, Mattel got in trouble because they made this Barbie doll, and you'd pull the string on the back of the Barbie doll, and it would say phrases. And one of the phrases that this Barbie doll said was "Math is hard. Let's go shopping."
Oh yeah.
And they had to pull that off the market and change her to say stuff that was less offensively stupid. But I think this is not an entirely new thing, but I think it's definitely going to pick up pace as time goes by.
But if it was me, I would rebrand and have 3 different companies and have one that sells the red state Barbie doll that says that stuff, and a different brand that sells the blue state Barbie doll that says the other stuff, and rake in all the money. But
yes,
heartless cat.
Everybody gets what they want. Everyone's happy. You get your money. It's all good.
You pretend to be 2 different companies like Coke and Pepsi, so you can also criticize that other evil company and get more money from all the hatred. This is like
you could program your Barbies to talk trash to each other just like in real life.
Yeah.
If they're within range, they start talking to one another.
That would be great. That would be a lot more fun. But anyway, all right. Well, Irvin, looks like you got this Toyota stuff.
Yeah, 37 million email scam.
Mm-hmm.
They put out a notice. I put the PDF as a second link.
Mm-hmm.
Their news release when they told the world, hey, so we lost some money. And it was because of an email scam. They
Wow.
Convince somebody to send the money.
Yep, they convinced them. They convinced somebody in finance, HR, hey, change the accounts to this, and they were able to get 37 million off of Toyota.
Yeah, business email compromise. It's that's a big one now. I think right now ransomware is even bigger, but I don't think that'll last for long because the defenses are pretty simple. But until they get the defenses up, I think this one will continue though. This is good old-fashioned social engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just one of those constant education things that we have to do.
Yep.
Can't let your guard down. You can't think, oh, I am safe, I'm okay. No, we're all targets and always need to keep our guards up.
Yep. I remember I went into the bank a few years ago and they had a sign up by the teller saying, if you're here to get a cashier's check to send to Nigeria, please don't do it. And I mean, it is your money. We can't totally say no, but we strongly urge you not to send that money to Nigeria.
Yeah.
So this one I've been hearing a lot about. Everybody's freaking out, a whole series of related things, all coming from Project Zero. So there have been a lot of 0 days in iOS that have just come out, some used by the government of China and some coming from another source. And many people are freaking out. And the Zerodium just said Android 0 days worth more than iOS 0 days. So everyone's freaking out saying iPhones are not safe and Androids are safer. And I'm not changing my tune yet. I've been telling people for years that Android is a cesspool and iPhones are a lot safer. And I still think that's true for normal users. Of course, nation states can blast through all of it with 0 days in both platforms. And if you get a good Android, like the one straight from Google, or if you take control of the security yourself by putting on a custom ROM, you can probably make it very safe. But I think an ordinary consumer Android is quite dangerous because the App Store is full of malware. And an ordinary consumer iPhone is very safe for normal use. But anyway, it certainly does blast the myth in case anybody thought that there was no malware on the iPhone or no way to get through. But I think everyone in the community knew all along that Charlie Miller used to write these exploits for the NSA. And the NSA totally can blast into your iPhone, and so can all the other nation states. But anyway, I think a bunch of people, I think this is a very common belief of people outside the security industry is that they can buy something that will stop the NSA. And they just need to get over that.
Well, and that should have become evident to us with the San Bernardino shooter. I mean, when they got that iPhone, they compromised that iPhone's encryption for not very much money either. It was only like $1 million payout. I mean, it was pretty much then. I think we knew that the government could get into these things if they want to.
Yeah, I think that mentality comes back from that I'm a Mac, I'm a PC commercials.
Yeah.
I think, the iPhones sold themselves as having no malware for a while, and Macs did, and I think now we all know that that's not really true, but it is in practice a lot safer because of the App Store. It's just harder to get the malware on the phone, which does in fact make you safer, but it's not that the intrinsic operating system is bulletproof.
Right.
All right. It looks like you got one, Elizabeth. Oh, yeah, related to what's happening near your house.
Yeah, it is. So the last story I got today was it came out that during the spring of this year there was a DOS attack that disrupted some power utilities in the United States. Now it wasn't specific as to which utilities, but California, Utah, and Wyoming were on there. So I think it's probably pretty safe to say PG&E is included in that. And the means of compromise happened via a firewall vulnerability. So I think this is very interesting, and I think that I think that this is going to be happening more and more, particularly with regard to ransomware. But attackers can do a lot of damage with these systems, and I think that that our infrastructure is a lot more vulnerable than we think it is. Now, it's cool that we're making efforts to improve it, but I think it's definitely quite a long road ahead on that.
Oh yeah, a lot of that tech is old.
Yep, just like banking systems, they're running on stuff that was implemented in the 60s and 70s and 80s when all this stuff wasn't, well, all these attacks weren't even really a big concern, or widespread concern, I should say.
Well, clearly you should just switch to Bitcoin and that'll solve all the problems.
Libra? Did I hear Libra?
Oh yeah, Libra. That's right. Libra, the answer to every problem.
Basically, they were able to continually reboot the firewalls remotely, which,
yep.
That's a good way. That's a pretty good way to get in there and do things. And when these stories hit the news, you're only getting half the story. So it makes you wonder what else they did while the firewall was down.
Yeah, that's certainly true. All right, and looks like you got one here. Social media?
Yeah, the SANS Institute has a newsletter, their monthly newsletter. This one was scamming you through social media. This is one of those, this needs to get into the hands of everybody.
Yeah.
It's a great little one-page reader. I think if in PDF form, it's a two-pager, but I mean, it's not that hard. This is one of those great resources to share with others to help spread awareness, help educate, and not bore people to death with long trainings. So here's a one-pager, quick little thing to talk about.
Now, this reminds me of a teacher we had who used to teach critical thinking. It's the same thing. If you actually know like the 5 common fallacies people spout in arguments, then it'll make you more aware. And you ought to just be aware that they're going to try these techniques on you.
Yeah. Yeah, I like their
evidence. I've heard that Estonia claims that they were getting hacked by Russia like crazy, and now they can resist it entirely because of this kind of training. They say everybody's trained from grade school in Estonia to be very careful online, and the end result is they are now very resistant to cyber attacks.
Neat. And all of these tips are really good too for just normal stuff like phone and email scams too. Like all these pretty much apply to a lot of the common ones that are going around.
Yeah, that's why I like this.
Yeah.
Every month their talks are easy to implement anywhere. It's not they're not talking too technical and they're not talking too lame. It's just right in the middle.
Yes.
Great information to spread out to others.
Definitely. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. Good.
Mark that.
And I've got this one here that I thought is very interesting because I'm now teaching a class more or less in responsibility and politics of the internet. And so, there's never been any president that used email. I think even Trump. They wouldn't let Obama use his BlackBerry. They had to give him a special hardened BlackBerry, but they really didn't want him using even a portable device at all, because when the president says something, it matters, and they wanted to do it through face-to-face communications or something. But now we got Trump on Twitter. And this really is a whole new world. And I think this is what the people that supported him voted for. They wanted everything to be just sort of crazy and raucous and disruptive in the White House. So now Trump just spouts out stuff with no apparent filter and no apparent regard for the consequences. And so now I think it's Chase, JP Morgan now has made a index measuring the effect of Trump's tweets on the stock market, and they are large. And, in the past, the president would only make carefully issued statements through a press agent and would not criticize the Fed, and the Federal Reserve person is famous, like the Oracle of Delphi, making these very veiled statements, very carefully arranged, so you're not even sure what they're saying. And Trump is the opposite, just blasting out outrageous opinions and things that he claims are orders, like he ordered everyone to pull out of China by tweet, and nobody knows if that's real or not. But anyway, it's having a big effect. And I think there's another one in the same spirit. He just tweeted to complain about somebody, and he got the wrong guy. So some random Baptist preacher was accused of being a journalist Trump didn't like, and then he got a flood of protests from all of Trump's followers. And it's a brave new world we're in, where the president just carries on petty feuds in public, and a large portion of America thinks this is wonderful and this is what they want. They don't want a lawyer president like Hillary that would make careful statements. They want someone that just spouts off like Archie Bunker, and they got him. And I think it's not as simple as this is just evil and wrong. It's a different way to run the country. You more know what's happening in the White House now than you used to, in a way. It's certainly not what many of us wanted who take politics seriously, but it does seem to be what a lot of America wants. Anyway.
I do wonder about the influence over the market, though. I mean, there are a lot of forces that influence the market, but that one's a little concerning to me because it seems like it would position someone to be able to influence securities that maybe they have a controlling interest in, or a significant interest in.
If you could control Trump's tweeting, but I don't think anybody can. In principle,
no. I mean, Trump himself or whoever. I don't think this necessarily just applies to Trump, though he's probably the best example of it. But it'd be interesting to see. I doubt the SEC has any kind of rules relating to social media whatsoever, but it would be interesting to see if they did.
Well, they do, because Elon Musk got in big trouble for tweeting stuff. If you're the CEO of a company, you are not allowed to tweet ridiculous things about stock prices, which you then don't back up, which is what he did. So he gets severely sanctioned for doing that, because that does amount to a public announcement of something, and it has to be accurate. But the president is not constrained by any such rules, I think. That's why Trump keeps saying, everything I do is legal because I'm the president, and that is largely true, I think. That's what the Mueller report said. They said, if he wasn't president, we'd prosecute him for this, but the fact that he's president means we won't.
Wow.
Yeah, so what's going to happen to the next president, or just the presidency in general?
Well, that is what a lot of people worry about. And I of course, was very horrified, like most Democrats, when he got in. And I got this book called Ill Winds that I went through and gave a talk about in my class, analyzing what makes democracies fall. And certainly electing characters like Trump is one way for democracies to end, especially since he does talk about canceling the election, ignoring the result of the election, and extending his term past the legal limits. I don't think he's going to do that, but clearly a lot of America would be perfectly happy to elect someone who would do that. And in a survey he found, I think 18% of Americans would be happy with a military coup and military rule. So this is how democracies tend to end, not by a direct military overcome attack, but by electing somebody who then cancels the democracy, like Vladimir Putin. So I was pretty upset about that until I realized I think it has always been the case that freedom is just on the edge of being taken away from you, and every generation has to rise and fight again to save it. And then there'll just be another disaster. It's just the only reason we're free is because each generation makes sacrifices and works hard to claw back any measure of freedom from the tyrants around them. And we just have to accept that's the permanent state.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that this coincides with the time that there's a push to end the filibuster.
I'm not sure if the filibuster is good or bad. It just seems neutral to me, but I'm not sure.
Well, I see both sides of it. I see that it can be a valuable part of the system of checks and balances, but I see that it's also used in a way that's primarily a tool to obstruct the other side from getting anything done. So,
unless you're that side.
Right.
Well, we certainly have a paralyzed government that can't do much of anything, and I'm certainly very grateful for that, because it stopped 90% of what Trump wanted to do, and I'm just glad that didn't happen. Right. And if you put in someone like Bernie or Elizabeth Warren that wants to do a lot of extreme things, I know that very little of that would actually get done, and that makes me feel more happy about supporting them, because I know they wouldn't really be able to ram through their agenda wholesale.
Right.
Right.
And that's why I think it's an important part of checks and balances. So, but I think you're definitely onto something as far as kind of having to claw back the vestiges of freedom with each successive generation. you know, there's a lot of profit in control. So
There is, and this is the current challenge, but there's always a challenge. It's not like this is the end, and this is much worse than what happened before in the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights era and the Civil War before it and all that jazz. There's always been a similar existential threat to democracy that we can barely fight against. All right. Well, I guess I'm going to stop it unless anybody had any further remarks.
No.
Okay. Thanks for coming. Farewell.
Mm-hmm.
thanks.